It's now my very great pleasure, as Director of the Garden here, to introduce the Minister, Mark Drakeford AM, Minister for Health and Social Services since 2013. As we've been told, very much part of the county, primary school here in Larne. We know most of your background now, Minister. And brought up in West Wales. And a background that wonderfully spans the age and knowledge spectrum, just exactly what we need in a minister. Previously worked as probation officer, as a youth justice worker, Bernardo's project leader in Ely and Cerrai, and professor at Cardiff University. What a combination. Minister, we're looking forward very much to hearing from you about the Welsh Government's policy and responses to the ageing society, and indeed the ways that we can all be aware of and contribute to that agenda.
Wel, diolch yn fawr iawn am y cyflwyniad caredig. Diolch yn fawr iawn wrth gwrs I chi gyd. Pleser mawr I fi I fod yn ôl unwaith eto yn Sir Gâr ar diwrnod mor hyfryd yn Sir Pertaf wrth gwrs yng Nghymru fel I gyd yma yn gwybod a diolch wrth gwrs yn fawr am y gwahoddiad I fod gyda chi heddiw. Mae hi'n wastad yn bleser gael dod I digwyddiadau fel yr un yma. Thank you very much indeed for the opportunity to be here this morning. It's a great pleasure, of course, to be back in Carmarthenshire. I know you've just heard from Jane, who is a member of the County Council for Larne, where my father was a teacher for many, many years. So, well, I am always meeting people still who were taught by him over that long period, and always a great pleasure for me to do that. And particularly to have the chance to talk to you about some of the work that goes on at the National Assembly for Wales and through the Welsh Government in that very important area of services that are provided for older people. I was thinking at the weekend when I was looking at my programme for the week and knowing that I would be here and trying to work out in my own mind what in 20 minutes I could select from all the many things that go on in government that are important in the lives of older people. And from the great welter of things that matter, what I decided to do is to concentrate on just one aspect of what we do at the National Assembly. And I've chosen for that reason to concentrate on the Assembly as a legislature, the Assembly as the place now where laws are made here in Wales. And I've done that partly because this fourth Assembly is the only Assembly, the very first one, which has those full law-making powers. The Assembly of 2015 is very different to the Assembly of 1999, in those very early days when it was the votes of the good people of Carmarthenshire that made sure we have had a National Assembly at all. Well, the referendum of 2010 created the Assembly as a full law-making legislature. And that means that in all the big things that matter in people's everyday lives, whether that is health or social services, whether it is education or transport, local government, culture, language, sport, all the things that matter in our day-to-day lives, the laws that are made for the people of Wales are made through our own National Assembly. And in that field of making legislation, nowhere have we been busier in the last 4 years than in the field of health and social care. So I wanted this morning simply to pick up some of the things I heard Jane mentioning as I came through the door, and to add to it by focusing on just 3 key pieces of legislation that will have gone through the National Assembly, we hope, by the end of March of next year, and which taken together will have such an impact on the lives of so many people here in Wales. Let me begin by picking up the Social Services and Wellbeing Wales Act, which I heard Jane talking about. Of all the different pieces of legislation that will go through the National Assembly in this term, this Act is by far the biggest and most substantial piece of legislation. And actually, I think it's quite a symbol of what matters to us in Wales and what matters at the National Assembly. But in the very first term that we have legislative powers, we have decided to make our social services the centrepiece of our legislative programme. And the Social Services Act, when it comes into force on the 6th of April next year, will make an enormous difference to the lives of older people. It will make a difference in some very specific ways. We will have new safeguarding arrangements here in Wales. We know that there are some older people whose lives lead them to be vulnerable to exploitation by other people. Financially exploited, personally exploited, sometimes even physically exploited by others. And we know that there is more that we need to do and can do to provide protection for older people when they find themselves in that very difficult set of circumstances. And the Act will introduce a new, clear, easy to use, more visible and more effective system in that way. For the first time as well, the Act will provide for the rights of carers to be equal to the rights of people who they care for. And we know, don't we, that most care that is provided in our society is provided by volunteers. And most people who volunteer to care for other people are older people themselves. So when I am on the phone to my mother in Carmarthen, as I generally am, last week, and I'm saying to her in the normal way, "So what are you doing tomorrow then, ma'am?" She says, "Well, I'm going to make breakfast for somebody." So here is my 86-year-old mother off to make breakfast for her 88-year-old friend, because the person who normally makes breakfast for her isn't available that day. And most care, most informal care that goes on in our society is made in exactly that same way. And that's why giving carers the same level of rights to have their needs assessed, to have their needs taken into account, is such an important part of that Social Services Act. But actually at the heart of the Act lies not simply a set of practical changes, but a cultural change as well. A shift in the way that we think of providing social services for people, often at the end, in the final phases of long and very successful lives, in which people have managed all sorts of challenges in their own circumstances, have brought up families successfully by themselves, have seen all sorts of changes that they have successfully navigated. The changed relationship we want to bring about is one in which the first question that we ask somebody when they are in need of help is the question that says, "What matters most to you?" And when we know what that person themselves would want in their own lives, then we want to mobilise our services to meet the things that would matter to them. Let me just tell you one story from Cenedlaethol. And it's a great example in Cenedlaethol of the way in which services are now being provided. All the people involved, all the people from health, all the people from social services, people from the third and voluntary sector as well. They now operate as a single team in one room where, when they get a call of someone needing help, they decide the one person who is best placed to provide that help, and that person goes out and asks that "what matters to you" question. And when I was there a few months ago, they told me the story of a man now in his 80s who lived in his same house for 50 years or more, and who in the last period of his life had seen those relationships that he had known for so long begin to move away from him. His wife had died, The neighbours that he'd known for many years no longer lived there. His own children lived not in Cenedlaethol but further away. And when they went and asked him the question, what matters to you? What he said to them was, he said, what I don't want is for you to send somebody to get me out of bed in the morning, and then maybe someone else to pop in the middle of the day, and then somebody else to come at the end of the day to put me back to bed. And all that day long, I would have seen nobody else, and I would have had no reason for wanting to get up that morning. What I'd rather you did, he said, was this: I will struggle to get myself out of bed. And he said, it will be a struggle, but I will do that for myself if you will send somebody to take me to the bowls club. And then I'll spend that morning in the bowls club, and I know that in the bowls club I will get something to eat, and I will meet people who I've known, and I can't play bowls anymore, but I know an awful lot about bowls, and I will enjoy telling other people the things that I can pass on to them about how they can play bowls better now. And if you'll send somebody to get me back home at the end of the day, I'll see to myself when I get home as well. And that'll be a day when I will have had a reason for getting out of bed in the morning, and you will have helped me to achieve what I want to achieve in my life. So that what matters to you question is at the heart of our new Social Services Act. It changes the power relationship between the people who provide the services and the people who use the services, and I think it will do some great things for us here in Wales. I wanted very briefly to mention to you, because I know it will be important to many people in this audience, what sounds like a very technical piece of legislation, a second piece of legislation, the Regulation and Inspection of Social Care Bill in Wales, which is currently going through the National Assembly. But it is an important piece of legislation because it will change the way in which we look after those people who live in residential care services here in Wales. We've had an enormous success in Wales in the last 10 years. We have fewer people living in residential care in Wales today than we did 10 years ago. And the number of people going into residential care has fallen every single year across that whole decade. And I think if 10 years ago you'd said to people that that's what the pattern would have been, given that the number of people who are getting older is growing every year in our society, I think people would have thought that was a really puzzling way of doing things. But the reason we do it is because we provide more services helping people to stay longer in their own homes, so we need to rely on residential care services less. So the average age of someone going into a residential care home in Carmarthenshire this year will be 86 years old. And that person will almost always be a woman, because we know that women live longer lives. And when people end up in residential care, we want to make sure that the services that the best of our residential care services provide, which are very good indeed, are to be found everywhere across our system. And that new bill will put into our inspection teams lay people. And I don't want professional lay people. I don't want people who are called lay people because they do it all the time. I want people with fresh eyes, who see things that other people have stopped noticing, who come at the whole business of the care that is provided for people very late in life and in residential care, with that sense of looking again at things to make sure that it would be the sort of care that you would wish or I would wish for people who are close to us. And we will complete the passage of that bill over the next few months. Now, I'm coming to the last of my three examples for the morning. I've left it till the last because I want to ask for a bit of help from you in this as well. And this is our Public Health Wales Bill. It is the final piece of legislation that we will take through the Assembly in this Assembly term, and the very final vote on the very final piece of legislation will happen on the very final day of Assembly sittings before the elections that will be held next year. And we have a proud and radical tradition of public health here in Wales. And actually, 80% of the gains that have been made in healthcare services across the United Kingdom have been made in public health It's only 20% that has been brought about by new drugs and new medicines and new forms of treatment. The big gains, right back from 1845 in Merthyr, where you were more likely to die from cholera than you were to die in coal mining. The great move to provide clean, fresh, safe water to people started in the Welsh valleys. And our tradition of public health has been there ever since. I'm quite certain, looking around the room, that I am not the only person whose childhood memories are being sat down on a Sunday evening to watch Dr. Finlay's casebook. Well, Dr. Finlay's casebook was written by a man called A.J. Cronin, Dr. A.J. Cronin, and he was the medical officer of health in the Rhondda Valley during the 1920s. He was from Scotland, and Dr. Finlay's casebook is set in Scotland, but lots of the stories there came from A.J. Cronin's experience of working in South Wales. And probably the biggest gain we have made in public health in Wales in the last decade came when we banned smoking in enclosed public spaces. Smoking, an activity that will kill 1 in 2 of the people who find themselves hooked on the nicotine that tobacco provides, and will lead to deaths that are difficult and undignified as well. So anything we can do to help on that agenda we want to do. And our public health bill will do a number of very important things. First of all, it will feature some things that are important for children and young people. We will do more to prevent smoking amongst young people. We will introduce new rules to protect young people from the dangers they face when they go into unregulated tattoo parlours here in Wales. We've had 500 people just before the summer in Newport having to go back into hospital for checkups because a rogue tattooist on Newport High Street infected them by the unhygienic practices that tattoo parlour indulged in. And although we managed to close it down for a few weeks, that man is back operating on the High Street in Newport, and our public health bill will make sure that that cannot and will not happen in Wales in the future. There are 2 aspects of this bill which are particularly important to older people here in Wales. We will reform the way in which our pharmacies operate. Our community pharmacies in Wales are a fantastic resource. We have 600 of them on high streets everywhere in Wales. And the great news about them is that you're more likely to find a pharmacist in the most disadvantaged communities in Wales than you are any other form of public service. And we know that there is more that pharmacists can do. More services they can provide closer to where people live. We know that older people are the largest group of users of our pharmacies, and we will reform the law to make sure that we can make the maximum use of the fantastic skills and experience and contribution to public health that our pharmacies can make in the future. And the other aspect of the bill that is particularly important to older people, and is only there because of the fantastic campaigning that older people's organisations, much like the Forum here, have carried out over the last few years in Wales, is that we will put new obligations on local authorities to prepare a plan to provide toilets for use by the public in their localities. We know that too often older people do not go out of their homes, do not go shopping, don't go into the town centre because they are afraid that if they go there and they need to find a public toilet, they won't be one to be found. And that has an impact both on people's physical health, but it has an impact on their mental well-being as well, in terms of loneliness and isolation, which I know we're going to hear more about in just a few minutes. It traps people in their own homes. It prevents them from being able to take part in the life of the community around them. And our bill will place a new obligation on local authorities to plan for the way in which they use and make properly accessible the large number of public facilities that are already there. Now, in my own bit of Cardiff, We have Canton. Those of you who know Cardiff, I live in the Canton part of Cardiff. And there isn't a public toilet in the old-fashioned conventional sense in that part of the city. And yet, 100 yards from the shopping centre in one direction, there is a sports centre, a community centre. It's paid for by the public. It has toilets there. You go 100 yards in the opposite direction, there is a chapter arts centre, a major arts centre. It's paid for by the public. It has toilets in there. And yet older people say to me, oh, I wouldn't be willing to go there. I wouldn't go in the community centre because I'm afraid someone would stop me and ask me where my squash racket is. And I wouldn't go into a chapter art centre because I'd be afraid somebody would ask me where my ticket to the cinema is. And our strategy will say to local authorities, you've got to do more to make it clear to those facilities and to people that they are there for people to use, and to make sure that we break down the barriers that are there that are stopping these things from happening at the moment. And that's where I need your help, and I need the help of forums like it across Wales. As I said, this is a bill that is timetabled to be squeezed into the very last months of this Assembly term. It would not be difficult for this bill not to reach the statute book. It would not be difficult to find ways to delay or disrupt its passage through the Assembly so that we miss the deadline that we are very determined to reach. So just as you will have lobbied Assembly members to tell them how important it is to do more for older people in relation to public toilets and pharmacies and other things, I need you now, when you have those opportunities, to be reminding them how important it is to older people that this final piece of legislation, this landmark public health bill, completes its way through the Assembly, and we don't have to wait, because if it doesn't get through, it just falls. We have to start all over again in the next Assembly, and more years will go by where we don't achieve the things which we know lie there within our grasp and ready to make happen. So, diolch yn fawr iawn I chi gyd am rando bore yma. Diolch am y wahoddiad unwaith eto, am y cyfle I siarad gyda chi I gyd. Dwi'n dymuno'n dda I chi ar gyfer gweddill y diwrnod. Dwi'n wedi weld y raglen, a mae lot o bethau diddorol I clywed. Daliwch ati gyda'r gwaith da rydych chi'n ei wneud I helpu I weithredu un eichelgas yma o wneud Cymru lle gwych I fynd yn hun. Diolch yn fawr iawn I chi gyd am wrando.